Now that the horrifying Big Beautiful Bill is set to be signed into law, I think it's a good time to introduce a concept from conservation biology and ecology into online political discourse, and that is shifting baseline syndrome. So, I'm going to explain what shifting baseline syndrome is, and I'm going to explain how it's a really interesting and helpful lens through which to look at the Republican Party and the Big Beautiful Bill. So, shifting baseline syndrome is essentially this idea that if you have a particular natural resource, like let's say a national park or a coral reef, get consistently worse and worse over multiple generations, each generation is only going to perceive part of that degradation because each generation is going to assume that the way the resource was when they were growing up is the baseline, is what's normal. So let's say that you live in Hawaii and as a kid, you go snorkeling in the coral reefs of Hawaii and you see a certain amount of coral, you see a certain amount of fish, a certain amount of garbage and pollution, and you assume, okay, that's what a coral reef looks like, right? And then, by the time you're in your 30s, it's like, wow, this has gotten worse than when I was a kid. And then you have a kid, and the kid grows up swimming in the coral reef and thinks, this is what a coral reef looks like. And then that kid enters, their 30s and has a kid and thinks, wow, it's worse. And so each generation is only perceiving part because each generation's baseline shifts. And I think that's basically what has happened to a lot of Americans with government. I think since the 80s, particularly, and since Reagan, the Republican Party has been constantly eroding government, making it less helpful, less funded, less effective, making it make less of a difference in our lives. And I think each generation grows up seeing government do a certain amount of things for people, and then they think, okay, that's what the government does. That's what the government is. And then over the course of their lifetime, they see it made worse. And then their kids inherit that worse version of government and think, okay, that's what the government is. That's what the government does. And I think with the Big Beautiful Bill, one of the reasons that the Republicans are able to get away with it is because we have shifted our baseline for what government can do. And then two, as a result of the Big Beautiful Bill, when our kids and grandkids inherit this more broken, less helpful government, they're just going to think, that's what the government is. And as our sense of that's what the government is gets less and less impressive, which with each generation's further shifted baseline, it's going to become easier and easier for Republicans to say the government's not great. The government's dumb. The government doesn't do things well. We don't need the government. Let's get rid of these services or regulations or taxes or whatever entirely, right? So I think Republicans are essentially taking advantage of and even accelerating a version of shifting baseline syndrome, but with what the government is supposed to do for people.